Now, members of parliament have voted for the removal of two judges in South Africa. That's Hlophe and Nkola Motata. Hlophe was found guilty of misconduct for allegedly trying to influence the constitutional courts in a matter involving former President Jacob Zuma. He continues to contest the findings in an ongoing legal proceeding. Meanwhile, Motata, initially convicted of drunken driving in 2007 and later found guilty of misconduct, is facing renewed scrutiny after the Supreme Court of Appeal overturned a prior decision ordering the Judicial Service Commission to recommend his removal. We unpack these proceedings in greater detail now with legal writer for Business Day, Tauriq Moosa. Tauriq, it's always a pleasure and a good afternoon to you.
Afternoon to the viewers.
All right, this has never happened before in South Africa. Let's talk about what transpired here.
So the most important aspect of this is that it's the first time that a portfolio committee, the portfolio committee for Parliament, has ever recommended the removal of not only one judge but two judges. Both of these matters, as you articulated in the beginning, have been around since late 2000s, 2008, 2007, when the complaints first came around to the JSE. In both cases, there was issues regarding the findings of the JSE. So, for example, with Motata, the JSE did find him guilty of misconduct, but not gross misconduct. The importance of that distinction is that with misconduct finding, that just usually requires a payment of a fine, and Motata had to pay 1.1 million for that. But that was the end of the matter. Then that matter was challenged by Freedom Under Law, and that's how it ended up at the Supreme Court of Appeal, which this year in June overturned that misconduct finding and ordered the JSC to immediately send this to the Portfolio Committee for recommendation. And of course, the Hlophe one has been around for equally as long.
What's interesting here is Judge Motata is actually retired, but we see him being ousted. Just explain to us how this one works, Tauriq.
So retired judges, the notion of a retired judge only has to do with whether or not that person is sitting on the bench. Everything else in terms of their judicial ethics, the JSC's control over them remains in place. And the reason for that is that judges have a lifetime remuneration, they have lifetime benefits. So the swings and roundabouts, of course, is that if you're still going to be benefiting from those aspects of being a judge, you're still beholden to the code of ethics as being a judge as well. So retired only has to do with whether or not they're sitting on the bench. Everything else still applies.
Tauriq, I'm keen to also get your thoughts here on the balance between politics here and, I guess, the independence that must come to play when we're speaking about the judiciary. And so when we're seeing members of the Justice Portfolio Committee really making some commentary around the specific removals, is there political I don't want to use the word interference, but, is there a political play there? Or are we certain that the procedure, the processes, the systems that are in place are all fair and independent and don't have that kind of influence?
So what it took to get to the Portfolio Committee meeting yesterday was a very long process involving primarily the findings and the processes in the JSC. Now, if one remembers, the JSC is itself comprised of members of the judiciary. It's made up of members of Parliament as well. It's a very broad mix, so many voices participate. So it's not only politicians. Importantly, it's the judiciary itself saying that we do not want these judges as part of our members anymore. So that's the important first step. So it's not as though the complaint went straight to Parliament. It went through a lot of processes, and the first process was the judges, the judiciary itself, making this finding. So it's only once it's gone through that, and also importantly, Motata and Hlophe both had legal representation and were able to make submissions for years in these matters. So it's not as though it's a unilateral decision. It's been fought and discussed and debated, but very importantly, the outcome arose as a result of the judiciary itself saying these are no longer people that are fit and proper to wear the robes.
And perhaps an interesting turn of events with this committee specifically is the entrance of a former public protector as a member of Parliament here. I'm keen to get the thoughts on that. It's democracy at work, I guess, Tauriq, that a move like that is possible.
So it is obviously very interesting because, of course, the former public protector, Mkhwebane, was literally almost just ousted herself as a result of the 194 inquiry, and then the vote in Parliament, the National Assembly itself. It's actually a very similar process to what we will now see with Motata and Hlophe. Also, the same number of votes, also having to go through a whole sort of inquiry, etc., and then now coming to the floor of the National Assembly. What's interesting is that Mkhwebane was the only dissenting voice in the vote yesterday. All the other members of the Portfolio Committee were in favor of the removal of both judges, but Mkhwebane was the only one that dissented. But obviously, the majority prevailed, and those matters are now going to the National Assembly.
Well, all we can do is sit back and wait. Tauriq, thank you for taking us through this very interesting development. That was legal writer for Business Day, Tauriq Moosa.